The heated Carrara marble feels warm beneath my grandmother's shoes. As I walk into the boardroom, canvas, faded from navy to something closer to twilight. 37 years old. 12 leather-backed chairs circle the polished mahogany table, each bearing a brass nameplate I've memorized over the past 6 months. The crystal decanter on the credenza catches the morning light, refracting it into small rainbows against the wall. Fresh white lilies beside it. The room smells like leather and expensive cologne. And something else now. Something shifting. My shoes make soft sounds against the marble. Not the sharp click of heels or the confident stride of leather soles. Something quieter. Something that doesn't announce itself. My grandmother always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated someone who couldn't do anything for them. He was about to prove her right. Quentin Mercer's laugh dies in his throat mid-sentence. Something about quarterly projections. Something about Thursday deadlines. I don't catch the words because I'm watching his eyes, watching them travel from my face, down to my feet, to the canvas shoes with the motor oil stain near the left toe, to my grandmother's shoes. Recognition flickers across his face. Not of who I am. Not yet. Recognition of what he said about these shoes. 24 hours ago, in the lobby of this very building, the things he called them, the way he laughed. The silence fills the room like water rising. 11 executives seated around that mahogany table, and not one of them breathes. They don't know why yet, but they can feel something shifting, the way animals feel a storm coming, before the sky changes color. Quentin's hand moves to his Omega watch. Adjust something that doesn't need adjusting. The tell of a man whose certainty is beginning to crack. I don't rush. My grandmother never rushed. She used to say that urgency was just fear in a hurry, and she wasn't in the business of giving fear any more real estate than it already owned. So I take my time. Walk past the leather chairs with their polished brass nameplates, past the men and women whose eyes are tracking me with growing confusion, past Garrett, the CFO, with his silver temples and nervous hands already shuffling papers that won't help anyone in this room. I stop at the head of the table. The chairman's seat, my father's seat, before the cancer took him, and I sit down. The room holds its breath. I feel it, the weight of 11 pairs of eyes trying to make sense of what they're seeing. A woman in a linen dress that smells faintly of lavender sachets, a cracked leather messenger bag with straps held together by dental floss, and shoes. Shoes that have no business being on feet that just claimed the most powerful seat in this building. But here's what they don't understand yet. These shoes have walked into rooms that tried to keep them out for 37 years, and they've never once apologized for existing. I open the restructuring folder. 6 tabs. 6 executives flagged for review. Quentin Mercer is the 3rd tab. 18 months of complaints. Anonymous surveys and exit interviews painting the same picture. A pattern of cruelty dressed up as high standards. A trail of people too afraid to speak up because men like him have always had a way of making the powerless feel even more powerless. 24 hours ago, he called my grandmother's shoes a craft project. Told me I'd gotten off at the wrong stop. Asked if this was a shelter. I look up from the folder. Find his eyes. 24 hours ago, I say, and my voice is quiet, almost conversational. You had some things to say about my shoes. His face drains of color. I watch it happen. The blood retreating. The realization crawling up his spine and settling behind his eyes like something cold and permanent. Everything he thought he knew about his position in this company, rearranging itself in real time. She bought them in 1987. $10 at a shop that doesn't exist anymore. The kind of store with hand-lettered signs in the window and wooden floors that creaked hello when you walked in. The kind that got torn down in the 90s to make room for a parking structure charging $18 an hour now. My grandmother was 43 years old that day. My grandfather had just left, walked out with a suitcase and a woman named Dolores and never looked back. She had $47 in her checking account, a grown son who was just starting to build something of his own, and a job interview the next morning for a position she wasn't remotely qualified for, at a company that didn't usually hire women like her. She needed shoes. Not fancy shoes, not expensive shoes, She needed shoes that would carry her forward when everything behind her was falling apart. These were the shoes she found: navy canvas with rubber soles. Simple, sturdy, the kind that don't demand attention, but don't apologize for being there either. She wore them to that interview the next morning. Got the job, one that was supposed to be temporary but lasted 14 years. Wore them to the bank when she applied for her first small business loan. Denied. Went back 2 weeks later. Denied again. Went back a third time. Same shoes. Same posture. Same refusal to accept someone else's verdict on what she was worth. That third time changed everything. By the time she died, she owned 11 rental properties, a property management company, a charitable foundation that sent dozens of young people to college. People who might have ended up stuck if someone hadn't believed in what they could become. And she still had those shoes. She gave them to me 1 week before she died. Her hands were so thin by then. I could feel the years in them. The work, the waiting. But her grip was still strong when she pressed them into my palms. "These shoes walked me into my future," she said. Her voice had gotten quieter by then, like she was saving her breath for only the words that mattered. "You wear these when you need to remember who you are." I was wearing them now, in a boardroom that cost more to build than my grandmother's first 3 properties combined. In a building my father built from a card table in her living room. In front of a man who thought he could measure my worth by looking at my feet.
Welcome to the hearth. I'm Mr. Harlan. There's an old truth that powerful people forget, and powerless people never do. How someone treats you when they think you're nobody is who they actually are. Tonight, a woman named Simone is about to test that truth. She's sitting in a boardroom in her grandmother's shoes, and the man across from her has no idea he's already failed. If you believe character is revealed in small moments, subscribe. That's what we explore here. Simone, take us back. What did he say when he first saw those shoes?
Because the man sitting at that boardroom table, he thought he was the first person to mock those shoes. He wasn't even close. The bank wasn't the only place that tried to tell my grandmother she didn't belong. She wore them to church when she couldn't afford Sunday heels. First Avenue Community Church, the kind of congregation where the deacons' wives showed up in silk, and the ushers noticed your hemline before they handed you a program. My grandmother walked in wearing canvas and rubber, head high, and sat in the 3rd row like she'd paid for the pew herself. Nobody said anything to her face, but she heard the whispers, saw the way certain women's eyes traveled down to her feet, and stayed there too long. She went back the next Sunday, and the next. Same shoes, same 3rd row, same posture that said she answered to someone higher than their judgment. The canvas had faded by then, from navy to something closer to twilight. That soft blue-gray that happens when fabric has been washed too many times and dried in too much sun. She never tried to darken them, never apologized for their age. "These shoes don't owe anybody an explanation," she used to say, "and neither do I." She wore them to the hospital when my father had his first health scare, 26 years old and working too hard. Chest pains that turned out to be nothing, but scared us all the same. She walked miles of linoleum hallway in those shoes that night, pacing, praying, refusing to sit down because sitting down felt like giving up. My father was fine. Walked out of that hospital 3 days later with a lecture about stress and a prescription he never filled. But my grandmother kept those shoes by her bed for a week afterward. Close enough to grab if she needed to run somewhere important again. The shoes got their first real stain around that time. Something from the hospital floor. Iodine, maybe, or some solution I never learned the name of. It's still there, a faint rust-colored shadow near the heel that never quite washed out. She wore them to a courtroom a few years later, testified against a landlord who'd been cheating tenants for a decade, overcharging on repairs, pocketing security deposits, letting mold grow in walls while he collected rent on time. Nobody else would speak up, too scared of retaliation. Too convinced nothing would change. My grandmother walked into that courtroom in canvas shoes and a dress she'd sewn herself, looked that man in the eye, and told the truth about what she'd seen. They won. The tenants got their money back. The landlord got 18 months, and my grandmother got a reputation. The kind of woman you didn't lie to. The kind of woman who showed up. The motor oil stain came later, 7 years after she first bought them. Some woman stranded on the side of the highway. Hazards blinking. Everyone driving past like she was invisible. My grandmother pulled over in her old sedan. Got down on her knees in her good dress, those same canvas shoes against the gravel, and helped that woman change her tire. The oil splattered near the left toe. My grandmother looked at it when she got home, shrugged, and said, "Now they got a story." That was her way. Everything earned its place. Every stain was evidence of a life that didn't sit on the sidelines. And then, there was the day she gave them to me. Her hands were so thin by then, the skin like brown paper stretched over bird bones. You could see every vein, every tendon, the way the years had worn her down to something essential. But her grip was still strong when she pressed those shoes into my palms. 1 week before she died, she knew. I think she'd known for months, but she was waiting for me to be ready. "These shoes walked me into my future," she said. Her voice had gotten quieter by then, like she was saving her breath for only the words that mattered. Job interviews, church services, courtrooms, hospitals. Every room that said I didn't belong. She looked at me with those eyes that had always seen more than I wanted to show. You wear these when you need to remember who you are. When folks try to tell you your worth by what you got on your feet, you remember what these walked through, what they survived. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. And baby, she squeezed my hands harder. Watch what people do when they think it don't matter. When they think you can't do nothing for them. That's when you see who they really are. I was wearing them now, standing in the lobby of Meridian Capital Partners, a building designed by architects who understood exactly one thing: how to make people feel small. 40-foot ceilings, heated Carrara marble that probably cost more per square foot than my grandmother's first rental property. Floor-to-ceiling windows filtering the morning light into something bronze. And cold. Everything about that lobby whispered, "You don't belong here." The security desk with its marble facade, the abstract art that looked expensive because it was incomprehensible. The way the receptionist's heels clicked against the floor like metronomes counting down to judgment. But I didn't feel small. I felt my grandmother's steps. 37 years of them. Church services and courtrooms and hospitals and a highway shoulder helping a stranger. Every floor that tried to reject her. Every room that said she wasn't enough. I looked down at the canvas. Faded to twilight. At the motor oil stain near the left toe. At the iodine shadow by the heel. And I waited. He had no idea who he was talking to. The man I was about to meet. The one whose voice I could already hear echoing across that marble lobby. He had no idea what those shoes had walked through, or whose granddaughter was wearing them now. And for reasons I was only beginning to understand, I wasn't going to tell him, not yet. That's when I heard him. The kind of man my grandmother warned me about. The kind who looked at shoes before he looked at souls. His voice reached me before I saw him. "Tell legal I need it by Thursday, not Friday. Thursday. If Richardson can't handle that, find me someone who can." Mid-sentence, mid-stride, mid-world. The kind of voice that expected rooms to rearrange themselves around it. I knew that voice. Not personally. We'd never met. But I'd heard recordings, quarterly earnings calls, investor presentations, 6 months of studying this company from the margins, learning its rhythms, memorizing its players. Quentin Mercer, Senior VP of Acquisitions. The man responsible for the deals that made Meridian Capital what it was. The man whose close rate was the highest in the division's history. The man currently walking toward me across 40 feet of heated Carrara marble. I watched him approach. Bespoke charcoal suit with hand-stitched lapels. The kind of tailoring that costs more than a semester of community college. Ferragamo loafers in cordovan leather. Polished to a mirror shine. The kind of man whose professional headshot probably cost more than some people's rent, whose teeth were too white and too straight, and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He was with 2 others, a younger man trailing half a step behind, tablet clutched like a shield, a woman in pearls who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, but had learned to hide it behind makeup and posture. None of them looked at me, not at first. Then Quentin's eyes dropped to my shoes. I saw it happen, the way his gaze traveled down from my face to my feet and stopped there like it had hit a wall. His stride slowed, his expression shifted. Something between confusion and contempt, settling into the lines around his mouth. Well, he stopped walking entirely. Did Goodwill start an internship program? The younger man behind him let out a nervous chuckle. The woman in pearls looked away, studying the abstract art on the wall like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the building. Nobody said anything. Quentin took a step closer. His cologne reached me first. Something expensive that smelled like ambition and dry-cleaning chemicals. No, seriously. His voice was louder now. Performative. He wanted an audience. What are those? Actually, he held up a hand before I could respond, though I hadn't been planning to. Don't explain. I'm sure there's a very inspiring story about thrift stores and bootstraps. Save it for your memoir. He checked his watch while he said it, not looking at me, addressing me like I was a minor inconvenience between appointments. Those are what happens when a shoe and a dish rag have a baby. The chuckle behind him grew bolder. The woman still wouldn't look at me. Someone should call security. Quentin was grinning now. Perfect teeth. Dead eyes. I think we've been invaded by someone's craft project. Craft project. The words hit me like a physical thing, like a hand around my throat. Not because they hurt. I'd heard worse in my life, been called worse, but because of what they were touching, what they were mocking. 37 years of my grandmother's steps, the bank that said no 3 times, the church that whispered, the hospital hallway at midnight, the courtroom where she told the truth when everyone else was too afraid, the motor oil stain from a stranger on the highway, her hands, thin as paper, pressing them into my palms. This man was laughing at all of it, and he had no idea. Sweetheart. He was closer now, but still not looking at me. Still checking that watch? Addressing me like something to be handled and forgotten. Close enough that I could see the tiny thread on his lapel where the stitching wasn't quite perfect. I don't know who let you in here, but this isn't a shelter. Maybe try the Mission on 5th Street? I hear they have coffee. The younger man laughed outright. The woman finally looked at me. Just for a second, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been shame. But she didn't say anything, didn't do anything, just turned and followed when Quentin started walking again. His Ferragamo loafers clicked against the marble. Confident, unhurried, the sound of a man who'd never had to worry about where he stepped or who he stepped on. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. Why would he? The quarterly reports didn't include my photograph. The board meetings I'd been monitoring remotely didn't show my face. For 6 months, I'd existed in the margins of this company, learning its secrets, watching its patterns, invisible by choice. And now this man with his perfect suit and his expensive shoes and his cruelty worn like a status symbol, had just laughed at my grandmother. I could end this with 3 words. I could say I'm Simone Beaumont and watch his face drain of color. Watch him scramble for apologies that would never be enough. Watch him try to recalculate everything he thought he knew about his position in this company, knowing he'd just mocked the person who controlled his future. Part of me wanted to. The part that remembered my grandmother's grip on my hands. The part that heard her voice telling me these shoes didn't owe anybody an explanation. But I wanted something more valuable than his fear. I wanted the truth of who he was when he thought no one important was watching. My grandmother used to say that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And Quentin Mercer was still showing me, the way he walked away without looking back, the way his laugh echoed off the marble, the way everyone around him either joined in or looked away. He wasn't done showing me yet, and I wasn't done looking, so I said nothing. I stood there in my grandmother's shoes, on heated Carrara marble that probably cost more than her first 3 rental properties combined, and I watched him walk away, bronze-tinted light falling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette getting smaller, the sound of his loafers fading into the building's expensive hum. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that boardroom, same dress, same bag, same shoes, and I'd finally know if my grandmother was right, that how someone treats you when they think you're nobody Tells you everything about who they really are.
Here's what most people get wrong about patience. They think it's passive. They think it's waiting. They think it's what you do when you don't have power. But there's another kind of patience, the kind that watches, the kind that remembers, the kind that lets someone dig their own grave, one sentence at a time. Simone isn't waiting because she's powerless. She's waiting because she knows something he doesn't. Subscribe if you've learned that the best responses aren't always the fastest ones. Tomorrow morning, same shoes, same dress, same boardroom, and he still has no idea.
I didn't leave the building after Quentin walked away. I stayed. 2 hours of wandering hallways, riding elevators, sitting in waiting areas with my cracked leather messenger bag and my grandmother's shoes. Invisible, watching. The 14th floor had a coffee machine that had been broken for 6 weeks. I found that out from a facilities manager named David who was waiting for the service elevator with a cart full of paper towels. He told me about it while we waited. The machine, the complaints, the requisition forms that kept getting lost somewhere between his desk and whoever approved repairs. Last person who pushed too hard about it? David shook his head. Moved to a basement office for 3 months. Some nonsense about restructuring workspace allocation. He didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask why I was there. People in service uniforms learn not to ask questions about people in waiting areas. It's safer that way. Little kingdoms, little kings. The 15th floor had a cafe that sold $4 lattes that tasted like burned ambition. I bought one and sat in the corner, watching Quentin Mercer work the room. He was good at it. I'll give him that. His handshakes were calibrated, firm for equals, firmer for subordinates, deferential for anyone above him. His laughs were timed to land exactly when his conversation partner expected validation. He moved through that cafe like a politician working a fundraiser, touching shoulders, making eye contact, saying names like he'd just remembered something important about each person. But I watched who he didn't perform for. The young man in a blazer 2 sizes too large who brought him a replacement coffee. This isn't what I ordered. Get me real coffee. Not whatever this is. No please. No thank you. Just dismissal. The woman with pearls and exhausted eyes. The same one from the lobby, who handed him a folder. Richardson says Thursday is impossible. Legal needs more time for then legal needs to work faster. Everyone's replaceable, Sarah. First lesson of business. He didn't look at her when he said it. Didn't see the way her jaw tightened, or the way her fingers went white around that folder. 20 minutes of observation. He never once said thank you. Never once acknowledged the humanity of anyone who couldn't advance his career. Never once looked at a person's face when their shoes weren't shiny enough to reflect his ambition back at him. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. You can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone whose shoes aren't shiny. Watch what they do when they think it don't matter. When they think you can't do nothing for them. I looked down at my own shoes. The canvas faded to twilight. The motor oil stain, the iodine shadow. She'd been watching people her whole life, learning who they really were underneath the performance. And she'd been right every single time. My father built this company, Meridian Capital Partners. Started it from a card table in my grandmother's living room in 1987, the same year she bought those canvas shoes. I have a photograph of that card table somewhere. Yellow rose wallpaper in the background. My father, 23 years old, with a calculator and a legal pad, and dreams bigger than the room could hold. He was good at money, less good at people. My mother left when I was 9. I never really understood why until I was older. Until I learned that some people build empires at the expense of everything softer. Until I learned that my father's genius for numbers came with a blindness to the humans behind them. I refused the trust fund for a decade. Wouldn't touch his money. Wouldn't answer his calls most years. We had conversations that were more like ceasefires. Visits that felt like diplomatic missions between hostile nations. And then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic, aggressive. The kind of word that ends arguments and starts different conversations entirely. 6 months of hospitals and lawyers and sitting beside a bed where a man I barely knew tried to tell me things he should have said 30 years earlier. 6 months of watching him shrink, watching the empire builder become something smaller, and more afraid. "I built something," he said to me near the end. His voice thin, his hands trembling against the hospital sheets. "But I don't know if I built something good." He was looking at me when he said it, looking for something I couldn't give him. Absolution, maybe? Or permission, or just acknowledgement that he'd tried. He died on a Tuesday in February. My grandmother followed 2 months later. She'd buried her only son, and I think some grief is too heavy for even the strongest heart to carry. She gave me those shoes 1 week before the end. Pressed them into my hands with that grip that was still so strong despite everything her body was going through. "Your daddy built something tall," she said. "But remember, it don't matter how high you build if you forget what the ground feels like." I inherited everything. The company, the money, the corner office on the 47th floor with his reading glasses still sitting on the desk where he left them. The board expected me to sell. That's what heirs do, isn't it? Take the money and walk away. Let someone else deal with the mess. Let someone else figure out whether what got built was worth keeping. I didn't sell. I kept the company, stayed in the margins for 6 months, learning its rhythms. I read every quarterly report, memorized every org chart, studied the anonymous employee surveys that painted pictures no executive summary ever captured, and I built a restructuring folder, 6 tabs, 6 executives whose patterns told a story the performance reviews never mentioned, 18 months of complaints, exit interviews where people finally told the truth on their way out the door, a trail of cruelty dressed up as high standards. Quentin Mercer was the 3rd tab. The man in the lobby hadn't been evidence. Not really. I already had 18 months of documentation. The flinching assistants, the impossible deadlines, the way talented people kept leaving his division for lower-paying jobs anywhere else. Today was confirmation. Today was the last piece of a picture I'd been building for months. I decided to see who my employees were when they thought ownership wasn't watching. I decided to walk through this building in my grandmother's shoes and see who looked at the canvas before they looked at the soul. And tomorrow, I'd walk into that boardroom, same dress that smelled of lavender, same bag with its dental floss repairs, same shoes that had walked through banks and hospitals and courtrooms and every room that ever said my grandmother didn't belong. Tomorrow, I'd finally know, not just who they were, but who I was going to be. That night, I sat in my father's office for the first time since the funeral. The reading glasses were still there, right where he left them, on top of a quarterly report he never finished reading. There was dust on the lenses. Nobody had touched them. Nobody had dared. I picked up the reading glasses. They were lighter than I expected. Wireframes, scratched in places, one temple slightly bent where he must have sat on them once and never bothered to get them fixed. The kind of detail you don't notice about a person until they're gone. There was a photograph on his desk I'd never seen before. Me, 8 years old, holding a fish at Lake Arrowhead, gap-toothed and grinning, sun in my eyes, wearing a t-shirt that was already too small. I had no memory of that trip, no memory of him taking that picture, or choosing to frame it, or setting it here where he'd see it every day. I'd forgotten about that trip. I'd forgotten a lot of things. The office smelled like him, leather and old paper and something faintly medicinal. Maybe from those last months, when the nurses came more often than the executives. 47th floor, corner windows, a view of the city that probably made him feel like a king every morning. And now it was mine. I set the glasses down exactly where I'd found them. Pulled up Quentin Mercer's personnel file on the desktop computer. The numbers were impressive. They always were with men like him. Highest acquisition close rate in the division's history. Revenue contributions that made the quarterly reports look like success stories. The kind of metrics that protected you. That made people look the other way. That let you say things like everyone's replaceable to a woman's face without consequence. But paper doesn't capture everything. Paper doesn't capture the young man in the too large blazer, bringing coffee that wasn't right. Paper doesn't capture 18 months of anonymous surveys with the same words appearing over and over. Hostile, demeaning, retaliatory. Paper doesn't capture a man standing in a marble lobby, calling sacred things a craft project. I scrolled through the exit interviews, the ones HR flagged but never acted on. The ones where talented people finally told the truth on their way out the door because they had nothing left to lose. I left because of Quentin Mercer. The environment in acquisitions is toxic, and everyone knows why. I was told my concerns would be addressed. Nothing changed. I found another job. A pattern of cruelty dressed as high standards. A trail of damage no close rate could justify. My phone buzzed. Corinne, my father's former chief of staff. Now mine. The only person in this building who knew who I really was. The only person I'd trusted with the truth. Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. They don't know you're coming. I typed back. Good? Do you want me to announce you? No. I want to walk in the same way I walked in today. A pause. 3 dots appearing and disappearing. In those shoes? I looked down at my grandmother's canvas. The faded navy, the motor oil stain, the iodine shadow near the heel, especially in these shoes. I closed the personnel file, sat back in my father's chair, my chair now, though it didn't feel that way yet, and stared at the city lights through the corner windows. What kind of leader did I want to be? My grandmother's voice came back to me, not the one about judging people by their shoes. A different lesson, one she taught me when I was 12, after a girl at school had spread lies about me, and I'd wanted to spread worse lies back. When someone hurts you, she'd said, you have 2 choices. You can pass that hurt on, let it keep moving through the world, picking up speed, breaking more things than it already broke, or you can let it stop with you. She'd looked at me with those eyes that saw everything. Cruelty's a debt that compounds, baby. The more you spend, the more you owe. And sooner or later, that bill comes due. I thought about Quentin Mercer. I could destroy him. Publicly, completely. Read every complaint into the record while the board watched him shrink. Call security myself with the same smile he'd used on me in that lobby. Let him feel what it was like to be dismissed. To be mocked. To be told he didn't belong. Part of me wanted to. The part that remembered his laugh echoing off the marble. The part that heard him say craft project like the words tasted good in his mouth. But that wasn't surgery. That was revenge. And revenge? Revenge was just cruelty wearing a different outfit. Cruelty with better justification. Cruelty that let you feel righteous while you added to the debt. The restructuring plan wasn't about revenge. It was about cutting away what was necrotic so the healthy tissue could breathe. Some people could change. Some people needed the chance. And some people had proven exactly who they were. Over and over. And the kindest thing you could do was stop letting them hurt anyone else. My job was to tell the difference. I stayed in that office until the city lights blurred together. Until the cleaning crew came and went and came again. Until the sky started turning gray at the edges. And I realized I'd been sitting with my father's ghost all night, having a conversation he couldn't hear. The dress was in my bag. The same linen dress that smelled of lavender sachets. The sachets my grandmother used to keep in her closet. I changed in the executive bathroom, watched my reflection smooth the fabric, felt the familiar weight of the cloth against my skin. Same dress, same cracked leather messenger bag with its dental floss repairs. Same canvas shoes that had walked my grandmother into her future and were about to walk me into mine. 8:47 a.m. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby. That same heated Carrara marble. That same bronze-tinted light through floor-to-ceiling windows. My shoes made soft, honest sounds against the stone. 37 years of steps behind me. And everything ahead of me, still unwritten. 8:52 a.m. I walked into the boardroom. My grandmother's shoes had never walked away from a fight. But they'd also never walked into cruelty for cruelty's sake. I was about to find out which path I'd take. 12 chairs around polished mahogany, crystal decanter on the credenza, catching the morning light the same way it had in my imagination 100 times. Fresh white lilies in a vase that probably cost more than a month's groceries. The room smelled like leather and furniture polish, and the particular anxiety of people who sensed something was about to change. Quentin Mercer sat near the head of the table, not in the chairman's seat. Nobody had claimed that since my father died, but close enough to suggest he thought he deserved it. He was laughing at something Garrett had said, that warm, collegial laugh I'd watched him deploy in the 15th floor cafe. The one reserved for people who mattered. Two versions of the same man. One for the powerful. One for everyone else. Corinne stood near the door, tablet in hand. Her eyes found mine as I entered. The smallest nod, almost imperceptible. Nobody else looked up at first. Why would they? I was just a woman in a linen dress and canvas shoes. I was nobody. Garrett cleared his throat. Silver temples, nervous hands already shuffling papers that wouldn't help anyone in this room. We have a guest joining us this morning. It's been requested that we hold introductions until she arrives. She? Quentin frowned. Who authorized? I did. My voice was quiet. But in a room that silent, quiet was enough. Every head turned. I let them look. At the canvas shoes. At the cracked leather bag. At the woman who'd handed Quentin Ashford his coffee yesterday. Nobody moved. I walked to the head of the table. Slow, deliberate. Grandmother's shoes, finally making sound on marble that belonged to me. Soft, honest. 37 years of her steps. And now mine. I pulled out my father's chair. Sat down. Folded my hands. And let the silence do the work. 5 seconds. 10. Quentin's hand moved to his Omega watch. Adjusting something that doesn't need adjusting.
There's a moment. Right before someone realizes they've made a terrible mistake. The body knows first. The hand reaches for something familiar. A watch. A pen. Something to hold onto. The mind catches up slower. Quentin's mind is catching up now. Subscribe if you understand that the longest satisfactions come from the quietest reveals.
I apologize for the unconventional introduction. I let each word breathe. I wanted to observe the company before making my presence official. Learn how things really work. See who my employees are. When they think no one who matters is watching. The CFO had gone gray. Ms. Beaumont? Simone is fine. Beaumont. I watch the math compute. Beaumont. Like the building. Beaumont. Like the founder. Beaumont. Like the woman in $10 shoes. Quentin's face went the color of old paper. I believe we've met. I turned to him directly. Yesterday, in the lobby, you offered to call security. Mentioned something about a craft project. His mouth opened. Closed. And then again, in the conference room, when you handed me your empty coffee cup and explained how you planned to gut my father's company while I wasn't looking. His colleagues stared at the table. These shoes. I lifted one foot slightly. They belonged to my grandmother. She wore them to banks that told her no. Courtrooms where she testified against landlords stealing from tenants. She gave them to me, the week before she died. I set my foot down. You called them trash. The lilies on the credenza seemed very white suddenly, like something arranged for a funeral. So, I opened my folder. Let's talk about the kind of company this is going to be. I could feel my grandmother's shoes on my feet. The canvas that had walked through fire without being consumed. The soles that had carried her forward when everything behind her was falling apart. And I could feel the choice they were asking me to make. Part of me wanted to destroy him. I could have done it, easily. Read every complaint into the record, while the board watched him shrink. Listed the exit interviews one by one. The talented people who'd fled his division. The anonymous surveys with words like hostile and demeaning and retaliatory appearing over and over like a chorus. I could have called security myself. Used the same smile he'd used on me in that lobby. Watched him escorted out past the heated marble and the bronze-tinted light and the receptionist whose heels clicked like judgment. Part of me wanted to watch him feel what it was like to be dismissed. To be mocked. To be told he didn't belong. But then I thought about my grandmother's hands. Thin as paper, strong as iron, pressing those shoes into my palms. And I remembered what else she taught me, about cruelty being a debt, about how the more you spend, the more you owe, about bills that always come due. I looked at Quentin Mercer, gray-faced, smaller than he'd been yesterday, his hand still hovering near that Omega watch like it could somehow rewind time. Mr. Mercer, he flinched, actually flinched. Like his own name had become something dangerous. I'm not going to fire you. The room exhaled. 11 people who'd been holding their breath, waiting for blood, suddenly didn't know what to do with their lungs. Not today, anyway. I slid a paper across the mahogany table, watched it come to rest in front of him. This is a reassignment proposal, effective immediately pending your acceptance. You'd be moving from Senior VP of Acquisitions to Community Liaison. His eyes scanned the page. I watched the confusion settle in. Community Liaison, nonprofit partnerships, inner-city investment programs, working directly with the communities our acquisitions affect. I kept my voice even. You'd be reporting to Corinne, who's taking over acquisitions? He looked up. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe? Or disbelief. This is humiliation. No. I held his gaze. Humiliation was what you did in that lobby. This is an opportunity. I paused. Let the words settle. My grandmother got this stain helping a stranger change a tire on the side of a highway. You're going to be working with people who have flat tires, Mr. Mercer. People who get passed by. People everyone else drives around like they're invisible. I looked at him. I suggest you learn how to stop. The word hung in the air. Opportunity. The same thing my grandmother got when that bank said yes on the third try. The same thing she gave to dozens of young people through her foundation. The same thing she gave to me. Every single day. You have until Friday to decide. I closed the restructuring folder. If you refuse, you'll receive standard severance and accurate references. No public statement, no scandal. You simply move on. And so do we. Quentin stared at the paper like it might bite him. But if you accept? I stood, smoothed the linen of my dress. You'll spend the next year learning what it feels like to work with people who can't do anything for your career. People whose shoes aren't shiny. People who've been told they don't belong in rooms like this one. I walked toward the door, stopped with my hand on the frame. The man who stood in that lobby yesterday, the one who called my grandmother's shoes a craft project, I looked back at him. That man doesn't work here anymore. Whether a different man shows up, that's your choice, not mine. The door clicked shut behind me. The hallway was quiet. Climate-controlled air, soft carpet, the distant hum of a building that didn't know anything had changed. I stood there for a moment, feeling my grandmother's canvas against my feet, feeling the weight of what I'd just done, or rather, what I'd chosen not to do. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Corinne was already inside, tablet in hand, the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. That was... She searched for the word. Not what I expected. Good or bad? Good. Definitely good. The door's closed. He'll take the job, you know. Too proud to quit. Too scared to walk away with nothing. I nodded. Probably. And if he doesn't change? The elevator hummed downward. 42 floors. 41. 40. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. My grandmother used to say that people could surprise you. That sometimes the ones who seemed furthest gone were the ones who just needed someone to see something worth saving. She'd believed that about the tenants she helped, the young people she sent to college, even, in her own way, about my father, she'd believed it about me. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage. Gray concrete. The smell of motor oil and exhaust and ordinary life. I looked down at my shoes. Canvas. Faded from navy to twilight. Motor oil stain near the left toe. Iodine shadow by the heel. 37 years of walking through rooms that tried to keep them out. They didn't look like power. They didn't look like authority. They didn't look like the kind of thing that belonged in boardrooms or corner offices or buildings with heated Carrara marble. But they'd walked my grandmother into her future. They'd carried her through every door that said no. They'd taught me what real dignity looked like, and reminded me who I never wanted to become. I stepped out into the garage. The concrete was cold under the thin soles. Ordinary. Real. Behind me, somewhere on the 42nd floor, a man was staring at a piece of paper that offered him something he didn't deserve. A chance. Grace. The choice to break a cycle or keep spinning in it. My grandmother gave me that same choice. Every single day. And now, I was learning to give it to others.
Cruelty wants to be passed on. That's its nature. Someone hurts you, and something in you wants to hurt them back, or hurt someone else, or just keep the pain moving so you don't have to hold it alone. Breaking that cycle is the hardest thing a person can do. Simone had every right to destroy him. Every reason. Every justification. She chose to offer him what her grandmother offered her. A chance to become someone different. What cycles are you carrying? What chances are you being asked to give? If questions like these stay with you, subscribe. This is where we sit with them. Thank you, Simone. And thank you for walking with us tonight.